Hi everybody, Dr. Stutzer here. I'm going to be reviewing the Hopkins Appendix E Research Evidence Appraisal Tool. This is a 10-page document, and so this might be a longer recording. I will point out that you do not use every single page of this document, that you use it the same way you would use any kind of algorithm, any kind of you answer the first question, and based upon your answer to the first question, it takes you to another point in the document. So be very clear as you're working on this that you will not answer every single page. Certainly something I actually am realizing and want to recommend to the Hopkins folks is it would help if they said what page you should move to and not just which section, because that does lead to, I think, some confusion in terms of where to go with the document. So there are not specific directions for this document, as some of their documents have directions at the end. So I've just kind of scrolled through this so that you can see the entire document, and we're now going to move through it methodically. So the first thing that happens is, again, you're going to fill out the title, the author, the publication date, and the journal. So you're not using APA format, but you are using all the elements of information that you would typically put into an APA citation. This number site will not be filled in, and that is because of the fact that it's really, you're using it for you. But if we were doing a large project as a group, we might have 15 studies, and I might be assigned studies 1, 2, and 3. So it just makes it more efficient than trying to work off of titles. You will include the setting. So where did this study take place, and who was the sample? Who were they, and how many were there? And does this evidence answer my evidence-based question? You are not going to start filling out this form unless you validate it through reading that study that it in fact does. So the first question that it asks you is this study quantitative, qualitative, or mixed methods? So in a quantitative study, we have measurable data. We're looking at results from larger populations. They're using typically surveys, observations, review of records, and they're analyzing the data using statistical tests. So think about it as a quantitative study. There's some there's definitely some numerical reporting in a quantitative study. On the slides that speak to using or applying the Hopkins model, I've listed the names of the most common studies that you might run into, the most common study approaches, and the level they fall under to help you with that. So that's available to you on Moodle. And if it is a quantitative study, you're going to go to section 1. A qualitative study is really more looking at interviews and narrations. They often use focus groups or observations, semi-structured types of interviews. Sample sizes are small, and it's reported really in a report that has lots of description, lots of verbiage, and lots of observations. So you're not going to see analysis of data. Now, mixed methods, which is, and if in fact that's the kind you have, then you would go to section 2. Mixed methods is an approach in which the researcher is actually using both. So the researcher uses some sort of questionnaire, instrument, tool to measure or understand something around a concept. So, and then to further understand it, they may also ask questions. So they could ask open-ended questions, or they could run a focus group after the data is back to share it with people and get the insight from people who participated in the study, what they think about that data. And so when you interpret a mixed methods study, you're going to be looking both at their how they manage the quantitative component and then how they manage the qualitative component. And so you'll see section 3, mixed methods, is where you would go for that. So the first thing you do is you go through and you say to yourself, is it quantitative? Is it qualitative? Is it mixed methods? Check the box and follow the directions at the bottom. So first we're going to say we have a quantitative study. So I need to go to section 1, quantitative. And here we are, section 1, quantitative. The next question is this a report of a single study? So if the answer to that is no, such as in a systematic review, you do not go any further. If you check the box no here, follow these directions, go to B. And if we scroll down a little bit more, we're now at quantitative B. But for the moment, we're going to say that it is a single research study. There was manipulation of an independent variable. There was a control group, and they were randomly assigned. So as I come down, it says if yes to questions 1, 2, and 3, this is a randomized controlled study, experimental study. It's a level 1. Done. You're done with this section. If there was manipulation, no control group, no randomization, so if yes to answer 1 and 2 and no to 3, or yes to 1 and no to 2 and 3, which is what I just said, quasi-experimental, level 2. And if no to 1, 2, and 3, it's non-experimental. So there could be an independent variable where I'm looking at something and I'm looking at how it relates to something else. So it could be a descriptive study. Let's use an example like bullying. And there's a questionnaire called the Negative Acts Questionnaire. In order for me to have a randomized controlled study, I could take a group of new graduate nurses and randomly assign them to a group that's going to get coaching in terms of handling negative acts in the workplace, and a group that's just going to get their usual orientation. So the manipulation of the independent variable is this additional coaching around handling negative situations. I have 50 new nurses, and I randomly assign 25 to one group as the control, so they just get the usual orientation, and 25 to the other group. They're going to get the usual orientation, plus they're going to get this coaching, this additional coaching. So there's manipulation of the independent variable, there's a control group, and I randomly assign them. That's a level 1 study. I have a group of orientees, and I'm going to just measure while they're on orientation the level of bullying they're exposed to, the negative acts. I just do that query. So I don't manipulate the independent variable, although I'm looking at the measurement of it, the measurement of the phenomenon, and so that's basically descriptive and non-experimental. I could say that I've measured, I could then on a subsequent orientation provide this coaching and measure their, I could measure their bullying, their negative acts quotient, that number pre and that number post. So they're really kind of their own control group, but that's quasi-experimental because everybody got the intervention. So I hope this didn't muddy the waters and confuse things, but the point of my trying to kind of clarify a little bit more is that I want you to recognize that you need to look at the study, you need to identify the independent variable. Remember, the independent variable is the intervention, it's what we're looking at. It's what's being changed or in the setting. And then you have to decide in terms of how the study participants were handled, was there a control group and was there randomization? And then carefully read, once you check those boxes, then carefully read your options to determine the level. In this box, you can put some bullets about how that article helped you to answer your evidence-based question. Now you skip to appraisal of quantitative research studies section. So I skip to appraisal of quantitative research studies, this section. And as we went through in class, you have to go through and answer each of these questions. So, does the researcher identify what's known? Is the purpose of the study clear? Take a look at the lit review. We had the conversation about are the sources within the past 5 years, or is there a good reason they're not? Are there studies that are the historical studies that everybody refers to? Was sample size sufficient? And please go back. I did a short piece on sampling, so you could take a look at that. If there's a control group, then you answer these questions. If not, you just do the NA category and you move on. Are data collection methods described clearly? So if you wanted to go do this study, you thought it was interesting, and you wanted to do it on your unit, would you be able to do it because they explain clearly how they collected the data? Were the instruments reliable? So I have a short voiceover on reliability and validity. Please review those again to determine and understand it. Did they even report reliability? So if the instruments, were the instruments reliable, yes, no, or NA, they should be reporting these two things. If they're not reporting them, you don't know, you would likely say no, and this is a weakness in terms of the quality. Again, if they use surveys, was the response rate greater than 25%? And then you make a judgment. Were the results clear to you? If they use tables, did they have some information in the table that wasn't consistent with what you're reading in the explanation? And then were the conclusions based on the results? So based on what they were studying, the conclusions they came to, were they actually based on the results? So now you complete the quality rating for quantitative studies section, which is down here. Quality rating for quantitative studies. High, good, low. And so what you're really saying is, if it's consistent, if there's a good sample size, if they came to strong conclusions, if all of these pieces were comprehensive, if most of these answers were yes, then one would call, right, so this is the appraisal of quantitative research studies. If all of those are yes, then you would, or most of them, say it's high quality. If things are reasonably consistent, there's one or two things off, it's good. And if there's a lot missing, then it's a low quality, considered low quality. So you need to do both. You need to determine your level, and you also need to determine the quality of the study. And once you do that, and right now we just only went through quantitative, I'm going to go through the rest, but once you determine level and quality, then you're going to put it right up here in this box. You're just going to type in level 1 high. Whoops, now you can see that I don't type well. High. And that's it. You need to determine both. You need to communicate both to the faculty via this form what you've decided. If you don't fill this in, you will lose points, because just because you filled in the rest of it, the faculty are not going to make the final determination for you. You need to make it. So don't forget when you're all done to fill that in. All right, back here. Is this a report of a single research study? No, we're going to go to B. We will not stop here now. We are not going to fill any of this out. Why? Because it's not a report of a single research study, so we're going to B. The next question is this a summary of multiple sources of research evidence? So if this is a summary of research evidence, and it could be, oftentimes they'll tell you it's a systematic review, but it could be a literature review, an integrative review, but yes, it is, then you're going to continue with this form. If it's not, if it's a summary of a QI project, then you say no and you follow these directions. Use Appendix F. And there's a voiceover with directions on the use of Appendix F available for you also. So once you say no, follow these directions, do not fill anything else out. You do not need to fill this out at all because you've identified that actually this is not sources of research evidence. Then it says, does it employ a comprehensive search strategy and a rigorous appraisal method? So if it's research, non-research, and is an integrative review, again, you go to Appendix F. If it's a literature review where they are just basically summarizing what's happening in the research, you go to Appendix F. If it is a systematic review or a systematic review with meta-analysis, and they'll tell you if it's meta-analysis, in meta-analysis they actually take the findings from all of the studies and they generate a new statistic in terms of the effect size of the intervention. Then the next question is, are all studies randomized controlled trials? If they are, this is a level 1 systematic review. If it's RCTs and quasi-experimental or only quasi-experimental, it's level 2. This is logical because if you think about it, if a single study as an RCT is a level 1, then if a systematic review looking at multiple studies are all level 1, it retains its level 1 as it's leveling. But if there are some that are RCTs and some that are not level 1 but are level 2, then you can only really provide the level at sort of the lowest level of the evidence. And certainly level 1, 2, and 3 evidence is not low level, but I'm just trying to make the point that basically if you have randomized controlled studies and quasi-experimental, you've kind of diluted the randomized controlled studies level. And then if it's randomized controlled, quasi-experimental, non-experimental, etc., it's a level 3. So how do I know that? How do you know that as the reader? Well-done systematic reviews will have a table of information that they've extracted from the studies. You do not go in and analyze each of those studies. That's not how we level a systematic review. You will just go in and look at what level of study they had. So did they have 3 RCTs and 15 quasi-experimental studies? Then it's a level 2. But the person writing the systematic review, the researchers that went out and brought all of this data together, are providing you with this information. Again, what study findings help, and now you have to appraise the systematic review. So we go through, this says quantitative studies. I do not fill this in. Do not fill it in because it's not the area. I now go appraisal of systematic review. And here's how we appraise the quality of a systematic review. So did they make clear what variables they were using? Did they provide you with the key search terms, the multiple databases, and what studies they included and excluded? So in the end, if you looked at all of that, could you go out and do the search the same way that they did? Did they have a flow diagram? So pretty typically there's a flow diagram that says, I found 152 studies, out of the 152, 87 didn't meet the criteria. And then basically the flow diagram helps you see how they determined which studies remained for final inclusion in the systematic review. Again, more details of the studies presented. So design, sample, methods. This is all going to be in tables. So these are, you read the beginning of a systematic review. There's a lot of information about the lit search. Why was it important to do this? What were they looking for? The description of how they did it. And then the middle part of a systematic review tends to have a lot of tables. So because now they've got multiple studies and they want to present in a coherent manner how they kind of compared them. And then the end of the study again is more description, synthesis, explanation of their findings. You want to know how they appraise the strength of the evidence, so they should be providing you with that information. And then just like in any other research, whatever they concluded, was it based on the information that was there? Was it logical? And did they include a section around limitations and how they address the limitations? So researchers should always speak to their limitations because we know that there's no really perfect study, that there are oftentimes difficulties around populations or accessing samples, so it is important for researchers to think about what were the strengths, but also where might there be some limitations and opportunity to improve the next time they do another study, or for you as the reader to just have a heads up about that. All right, so now we go back, we come back up here, and it turns out that your study was not a quantitative study. It was a qualitative study. So we're going to go to section 2, qualitative. So again, I apologize because this is a 10-page document, but we're going to go down, and all these pages I'm passing by, you're not filling out. You're not filling them out because they refer to a quantitative study, and you determined that your study was qualitative. And so we get to qualitative. And so qualitative, is this the report of a single research study? If it's yes, go to level 3. If it's no, go to 2B. Okay. So what this is really saying to us is that we're going to go, that this is a level 3 study, and because it's qualitative, that if I go back up here, it's going to tell us, and I don't want to keep moving back and forth, to go to appraisal of a single qualitative research study. And so the appraisal of a single study is pretty short, if you will, but you want to know were the purpose, the research question, the justification, and the phenomena, were those noted? Did the study samples represent, study participants represent the phenomenon? Were they experiencing the phenomenon of interest? Did the researchers have knowledge or experience, did the participants have knowledge or experience with the research area? Did they describe the participants? Was sampling adequate? And again, you can go to the voiceover on sampling, but did they indicate that they had gotten, data was saturated, they didn't have any new themes emerge? And then did they go through and examine for trustworthiness? There's a voiceover about that. There's a specific way that they should be describing how they managed the data, the information, and did they follow that? Did they provide quotes and narrative to help you understand how they came to their conclusions? Did their findings flow from the question, and are their conclusions clearly explained? So this is the appraisal of a single qualitative study. Now we skip to the quality rating for qualitative studies, and let's keep going. And so here's the quality rating. And so here's how in qualitative studies it says there's no really agreed upon principles for judging the quality, but if it's a high or good quality, these are evident in some way in the report, and if they're not, it's a lower quality study. Let's go back up. And so again, you're going to look at the boxes that you checked here and use that in the application of determining the quality rating. If I go back up here and it says it's not a single research study, then it is actually a summary. If it's a summary of multiple qualitative strategies, then the question is, did they follow a comprehensive search strategy? So it's a systematic review of qualitative work as opposed to a systematic review of quantitative work. So it's a level 3, and if there wasn't a systematic review as described, then this is considered probably a literature review or an integrative review. So as we said above with quantitative research, you now need to use Appendix F. Let's presume that it was a summary of multiple qualitative studies, then we have to appraise it. So again, same thing. Did we understand the search strategy? Were the findings convincing? Did they compare findings from each study? Did they develop any new insights or discovery? And was there sufficient data, sufficient information provided for you to support the interpretation? And then you come back down to the quality rating for qualitative studies. And so that's how you manage appraising a qualitative study for the quality of the study. Qualitative studies are always level 3. Systematic reviews with or without metasynthesis of qualitative studies are always level 3. And then finally, if you have a mixed methods study, and I think this is a typo. This should say quantity. This should be an N right here. And the reason it should be an N is because you need to look at both the quantitative and qualitative parts of the study. So I'm not going to review those prior 8 pages again. What I'm going to say to you is you would examine the quantitative component to evaluate whether all of those elements are there. Did they talk about the purpose? Did they describe the sample? Did they speak to reliability and validity? Do the conclusions flow from the data, et cetera, et cetera. And so here you'll put your level of evidence and overall quality for that part. And then for the qualitative, you would do the same thing, level and quality. And then to determine the level of evidence, you would circle here, what's the design? So is it explanatory? Is it exploratory? Is it convergent? Is it multiphasic? So explanatory. They collected the quantitative data first, followed by the qualitative data, and they wanted to further explain the quantitative results. So the level is determined based on the level of quantitative. So I know that sounds a little confusing. Pretty typically mixed methods end up being more often than not level 3, but they could be level 1 or 2 if they did an intervention and wanted to come back and further explain what was happening. Exploratory, they collect qualitative first, followed by quantitative, and so this is always level 3. Convergent, they're actually getting the data concurrently, both the qualitative and quantitative. That's a level 3. And multiphasic, where they collect the data over more than one phase, also level 3. So it's just the explanatory ones where maybe I could have done a randomized controlled study of some intervention and then gone back to follow up and get some more information. And so then the level would be determined by the quantitative part. And then to do your appraisal, you look at and say, was the mixed methods section design relevant to address the quantitative and qualitative questions or objectives? Was the design relative to address these questions? For convergent parallel designs, was the integration of the data relevant to address the question? And for convergent parallel designs, were the limitations associated? So again, you're going to make a judgment call based on that, and then here's the rating system. So level, quality. If you have any questions, please contact myself or the faculty member for your course so that we can further clarify.